Welcome to our channel. Enjoy the video.
On the surface, Virginia's Colonial Parkway looked like the perfect place for a quiet evening. Stretching for more than 20 miles between the historic towns of Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown, the scenic roadway offered breathtaking river views, dense forests, and secluded pull-offs where couples often parked to watch the sunset. It was peaceful, romantic, and seemingly safe. But in the fall of 1986, that peaceful image was shattered forever. On October 9, 1986, 27-year-old Kathy Thomas and 21-year-old Rebecca Dowski set out together for an evening drive. The two women had been dating and planned nothing more unusual than spending time together before returning home. When they failed to show up the next day, friends and family immediately sensed something was wrong. Neither woman had a history of disappearing without telling anyone. Search efforts began almost immediately. A day later, park rangers found their blue Honda Civic parked at one of the Colonial Parkway's scenic overlooks. At first glance, it looked as though the couple had simply stepped away. But investigators quickly noticed disturbing details. Personal belongings had been left behind, and the vehicle showed signs that someone had tampered with it. One of the tires appeared to have been deliberately deflated, raising the frightening possibility that whoever attacked them may have first disabled their car, leaving the pair stranded and vulnerable. For several anxious days, investigators searched the surrounding woods, hoping to find the women alive. Instead, the search ended in tragedy. Hidden deep in a wooded area not far from where the car had been abandoned, authorities discovered the bodies of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. The crime scene revealed a brutal double homicide. Detectives immediately realized this was no random robbery or accident. Whoever committed the murders had taken time to move the victims away from the roadway, suggesting planning, confidence, and familiarity with the isolated landscape. The investigation quickly expanded, but clues were painfully scarce. There were no eyewitnesses, no clear suspect, and very little forensic evidence that investigators could use with the technology available in the mid-1980s. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, explored personal relationships, and searched for anyone who might have held a grudge. Every lead eventually went cold. For the public, the murders were almost impossible to comprehend. The Colonial Parkway had always been viewed as a place of beauty and history, not a hunting ground for a killer. Most people believed this horrific crime was an isolated act, a terrible event that would never happen again. They were wrong. Within months, another young couple would disappear under eerily similar circumstances, transforming one unsolved double murder into one of America's most chilling serial crime mysteries. For months after the murders of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, investigators searched tirelessly for answers. Detectives followed tip after tip, interviewed potential witnesses, and waited for the one piece of evidence that might identify the killer. But nothing broke the case. As time passed, many hoped the tragedy had been a one-time act of violence. Then, less than a year later, those hopes were destroyed. On September 19, 1987, 20-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards disappeared after spending the evening together near the Colonial Parkway. The next day, a hunter made a horrifying discovery along the banks of the York River. The young couple had been murdered. Although this crime scene was several miles from where Kathy and Rebecca had been found, detectives couldn't ignore the similarities. Once again, two young people had vanished after meeting in a secluded location. Once again, the killer had chosen an isolated area where there were few witnesses and little chance of being interrupted. For the first time, investigators seriously considered a terrifying possibility. They weren't chasing a single unsolved murder anymore. They could be hunting a serial killer. As news spread, fear gripped southeastern Virginia. Couples who once visited scenic overlooks to enjoy a quiet evening now avoided them entirely. Parents warned their children to stay away from isolated roads after dark. What had once been a peaceful national park had become a place associated with dread. Investigators searched for connections between the victims. Did they know each other? Did they attend the same schools? Work with the same people? visit the same places? The answer seemed to be no. The victims came from different backgrounds, different communities, and different lives. The only clear link was that they were young couples spending time together in secluded areas. That made the mystery even more frightening. If the victims had no connection to one another, then almost anyone could become the next target. Just when authorities believed they understood the killer's pattern, another couple disappeared. In April 1988, 20-year-old Richard Keith Call and 18-year-old Cassandra Lee Haley left for what should have been an ordinary evening together. They never returned. Days later, their car was discovered abandoned near the Colonial Parkway. Unlike the previous cases, there were no bodies. Richard and Cassandra had vanished without a trace. The empty vehicle immediately alarmed investigators. It echoed details from the first case, reinforcing fears that the same offender, or offenders, had struck again. Search teams combed forests, rivers, and nearby fields for weeks. Divers searched waterways. Helicopters scanned dense woodland from above. Nothing. No reliable witnesses. No confirmed sightings. No bodies. The disappearance of Richard and Cassandra transformed the investigation from deeply troubling to almost unimaginable. Now investigators faced 3 attacks involving 6 victims, yet they still had no suspect and no clear explanation for how the killer managed to disappear without leaving meaningful evidence. As each case remained unsolved, public confidence began to fade. Rumors spread through local communities. Some believed the murderer was a truck driver passing through the area. Others suspected someone who knew the park's hidden roads better than anyone else. There were even whispers that the killer might have posed as a police officer, using authority to gain the victim's trust before launching the attacks. But every theory lacked proof. With each passing month, the mystery grew darker. Then, in 1989, another young couple would disappear, bringing the known series to its haunting conclusion and leaving investigators with even more questions than answers. By the summer of 1989, fear surrounding the Colonial Parkway had become impossible to ignore. 3 couples had already disappeared or been murdered, yet investigators still had no arrests, no definitive suspect, and no clear understanding of who was behind the crimes. Then, the nightmare returned. On the evening of September 22, 1989, 21-year-old Daniel Lauer and 18-year-old Anna Maria Phelps spent time together before heading toward a secluded area near Interstate 64, not far from the Colonial Parkway. Like the other victims, they simply vanished. When they failed to return home, friends and relatives immediately reported them missing. Search teams began looking for any trace of the couple. Days later, Daniel's car was discovered abandoned. Once again, investigators were faced with a familiar and chilling scene, a young couple missing, a vehicle left behind, and almost no evidence explaining what had happened. 6 weeks later, the search ended in heartbreak. The skeletal remains of Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps were found in a wooded area in New Kent County. Time, weather, and wildlife had erased much of the physical evidence investigators desperately needed. Determining exactly how they had died, or identifying forensic clues pointing to their killer, became extraordinarily difficult. With 8 victims across 4 separate cases, investigators were now confronting one of the most baffling homicide series in American history. But a disturbing question divided detectives from the very beginning. Were all 4 attacks committed by the same person? The similarities were undeniable. Each case involved young couples. Each disappeared from isolated locations. Each investigation was plagued by a frustrating lack of witnesses and evidence. Yet there were differences as well. The victims were found in different locations. The methods of killing appeared to vary. Some victims were discovered quickly, while others were never found for weeks, or, in the case of Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Lee Haley, have never been found at all. Those differences fueled competing theories. Some investigators believed a single serial killer was responsible, someone patient enough to stalk secluded lovers' lanes and confident enough to avoid leaving evidence. Others wondered whether multiple killers had been grouped together simply because the crimes occurred in the same region and within a similar time frame. Another theory suggested the killer may have impersonated a law enforcement officer. A flashing light, a badge, or a commanding voice could have convinced victims to step out of their vehicles voluntarily, explaining the apparent lack of struggle at several scenes. There was also the possibility that the murderer was someone intimately familiar with the parkways, back roads, and wooded areas, someone who knew exactly where to strike and exactly where to disappear. Unfortunately, investigators in the late 1980s faced limitations that are difficult to imagine today. DNA profiling was still in its infancy. Surveillance cameras were virtually non-existent along remote roads. Cell phones, GPS tracking, and digital records that now help solve crimes simply did not exist. Detectives relied heavily on eyewitness accounts and physical evidence, both of which were painfully scarce in these cases. Years turned into decades. Boxes of evidence remained carefully preserved, waiting for technology to catch up with the mystery. Families refused to give up hope, investigators continued reviewing old files, and every advance in forensic science raised the possibility that the truth might finally emerge. But even after all these years, one haunting question remains. Was the Colonial Parkway killer hiding in plain sight all along, or had they vanished forever, leaving behind one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries? More than 3 decades have passed since the last known attack connected to the Colonial Parkway murders. Trees have grown taller, roads have changed, and millions of visitors have driven the same scenic route without realizing the dark history hidden beneath its beauty. But for the families of the victims, time has never truly moved on. Birthdays became anniversaries of loss. Holidays arrived with empty chairs at the table. Parents grew older without answers. Siblings built lives while carrying the weight of unanswered questions. For them, the case was never just another unsolved mystery, it was a wound that never healed. Despite the passing years, investigators refused to abandon the search. The FBI, state police, local law enforcement agencies, and forensic specialists periodically reopened the case, re-examining every photograph, witness statement, and piece of physical evidence. Items that seemed insignificant in the late 1980s were tested again using modern forensic techniques that simply didn't exist when the murders occurred. Advances in DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, and evidence preservation have transformed countless cold cases across the United States. Cases once thought impossible to solve have finally reached the courtroom decades later, giving investigators hope that the Colonial Parkway murders could someday follow the same path. Yet this investigation remains uniquely difficult. Some evidence was lost to time. Other evidence had deteriorated before today's technology became available. Witnesses' memories faded, and some key individuals passed away before they could be questioned again. Every year that passes makes solving the mystery even more challenging. Another question continues to divide experts. Were all 4 attacks truly the work of a single serial killer? Some investigators believe the similarities are too strong to ignore. Others argue that the differences between the crime scenes suggest more than one offender. There is still no universal agreement, and until someone is identified, both possibilities remain on the table. One of the most heartbreaking chapters involves Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Lee Haley. Unlike the other victims, their bodies have never been found. Their disappearance leaves investigators with fewer answers and their loved ones without the chance for a proper goodbye. Even today, law enforcement continues to encourage anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. A forgotten conversation, an old photograph, or a detail that once seemed meaningless could still become the missing piece of the puzzle. The Colonial Parkway itself remains a place of extraordinary beauty. Visitors admire the rivers, forests, and historic landscapes, often unaware that these peaceful surroundings were once the backdrop for one of America's most haunting unsolved crime series. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't only that 8 young lives were forever changed. It's that, after all these years, no one has been held accountable. Somewhere, the truth still exists. Whether it lies hidden in an overlooked piece of evidence, locked inside an old investigative file, or in the memory of someone who has remained silent for decades, the answer is still out there, waiting to be discovered. Until that day comes, the Colonial Parkway murders remain more than just a cold case. They are a solemn reminder that even in the most beautiful places, unimaginable darkness can hide in plain sight. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime mysteries. And tell us in the comments, do you believe the Colonial Parkway murders were the work of one serial killer, or multiple killers?